What's up guys, Cloudie here, checking in from the America server, and this is gonna be about something that I often see you guys ask about, be that on Facebook or Reddit or even here on YouTube, and namely that is how to build certain characters. Most often, of course, you are asking about DPS or damage dealers, so I figured I would make a quick guide on basically what's the basic thought process behind making the decisions. Now, of course, the newer characters nowadays have all sorts of gimmicks compared to the old ones who just had straight damage dealing abilities. Now the newer ones are really just a lot more complicated, so you always have to keep that in mind, how those character works. Do they have like always crit abilities? Do they ignore defense? Do they have a ton of crit damage? So this is something that you always need to think about, because that kind of changes how you build a character. So that's specific. For that you need to read the skills and the talents. That's really just the only way to go about it. But there is a basic approach to how you put those characters together. Now I'm gonna be using Xerah to showcase this because she doesn't have that many gimmicks in the way she is built. Now the old way and the long or the short version to this is that basically you kept crit at 100% and then you just focus on attack. In the very old days we had like every 100k attack we used 100 crit damage, but since then this has changed a little bit. Mainly thanks to the support characters and Dark Legion armor. Of course, with support characters I mean Lovril. If we quickly check her, if I can find her in my list somewhere, there she is. She has her S2, which will give 50% plus 15% of her crit damage to the highest attacker. Now with my Lovril, who is like alright-ish gear, that's over 100% crit damage that just goes to the highest attacker, plus she gives attack, plus she gives mana regen, she gives penetration. So Lovril is pretty much hands down the best support character you can have. If she's available for a certain fight and you aren't like constantly dispelled, it's highly recommended that you take her. But now let's go back to actually checking the stats. Now, the first two things that you need to consider is what content you're gonna be fighting and what supports you're gonna be bringing, because this can change your stats. Now, how does this work? For instance, two of the world bosses have crit suppression or crit reduction. Xanadus has 30% crit suppression, and Troteanus decreases your crit by 30% when he hits you with his trident. That means that just having 100% crit is actually not enough, because then you're still 30% short at times, and that decreases your damage. So the very first thing you look at is how much crit you need and what kind of supports you will be bringing that will give you crit. Priests generally have a tier 2 perk that will increase the crit chance by 15%, and if you have it a second time in the party, then it will give an extra 5%. So altogether 2 priests will bring 20, 3 will 25, and so on and so on. There is a net. If she has 100% uptime of her buff, that's 25%. Now my Xerah right now has 75%, plus that was actually done with her tier 5 light in mind, which also gives 10%. So with a priest buff that would have been 100, but I just changed her perks for another content since then. But yeah, basically because this was for a smaller content where I would not have a net buff, for instance, I had more crit on this gear. And then there is crit damage, which she wouldn't need all that much thanks to her unique weapon, and Lovril of course, and she has some penetration. So really the gearing depends on what you are running and what kind of supports you will be having. But the basic approach is, once you have 100% crit, comparing the boss and the content and the supports you have, then you can focus on attack. 400k is not too much, it's not bad for a 4-star, but as you get higher and higher, you increase your soul weapon, you will be seeing some real big numbers where the really veiled characters are like over 1 million attack, and they will have maybe 200 crit damage or not even that much. But yeah, basically you want to kind of balance crit damage versus attack, but attack is the heavy winner these days. So once you have maxed crit, you will be focusing attack with a little bit of crit damage. And moving on, the next stat would be penetration, which is a really, again, content specific stat and can be character specific, because some characters ignore defense a lot, like say Xerah, so she might not need that depending on the content again. Also, you want to know if the bosses can be if the defense of the bosses can be decreased, like say, can you bring fill up, can you bring close, because if they can be, then you don't need that much penetration. Does the boss have a lot of defense in the first place? For instance, Shakme has very low defense, so it means that penetration doesn't work that much on him. You don't need that much penetration there. Meanwhile, for instance, if you go to Sky Trial or whatever trial you are doing, those bosses have pretty high defenses which cannot be shredded even. So then penetration becomes more and more useful, because you will be doing more damage that way. So again, content versus buffs, what you bring. Let's see what other stats you can usually choose. You can go for speed. Now, most characters, again, don't need speed these days, because you get so much buffs from for instance, Mei or Kala, who are pretty good at doing that. And most characters just do not need more speed than that. I have some lines on Xerah because her attacks are a little bit slow, and I needed the mana regen in the content that I was running, so I have a few lines on this set. Plus, this is how just the stats were on the items that I was running. But generally speaking, speed is one of the least favored stats for DPS characters these days, mainly because of the buffs you are getting. Again, priests can also buff with their tier 2, but there is also Mei, who is a very popular buffer, so wherever you have that, you don't really build speed at all. And of course there is mana regen, which is, again, nowadays the basic mana of the characters is so much better than the old ones that you don't need that much mana regen. Often you don't have a single line of that, especially if you have mana battery characters that will be replenishing your mana anyway. For instance, Shay, or again, Lovril brings a little bit, or if you for some reason are running Laias, then again you need a lot less mana regen, to the point where this is a single line I have, and it's just because I was running Flow where she needed a bit more mana to not be always dry, but she also gains mana from her unique weapons, so again, Xerah doesn't need that much. So these are the main stats. The most what you want is, of course, crit, chance and attack, then some crit damage, and then penetration, speed and regen depending on the content you are running. And so this is what you keep in mind, and of course the supports that you bring. And finally we come to item sets. Now for PvE, of course, I mainly talk about that. The best item set is Manticore, mainly because the 2 set and the 4 set bonus gives a lot of damage. That is 12 and 15%, so this is altogether 27%. It goes together, that it increases your damage, and this comes before defense is applied, so this is a really huge boost. Every item that gives a raw percentage damage boost is really strong. That's why actually, for instance, the new sword, the Shakme sword, is really powerful too, because it gives that kind of bonus. If I could find it, and I wasn't blind right now, but usually I am, so I have no idea who has it right now. Whatever, it doesn't matter. Now, what other sets can you get? Because getting Beast of Chaos items is a bit hard right now, although the next update, which is coming in a few days, will give you selectors, so if you have an active guild, it will become a lot more easy to have good lines on your items. But yeah, definitely this is still hard to get, because you will only get 2 line selectors. But if you cannot get these, then what else can you use? Now, dragon items are usually quite decent. the old item set that we used on a lot of characters was Swift Darkness, mainly because of the set bonus of the mana regen. Remember, old characters had very low mana regen compared to the new ones, so this was kind of needed so they could cast skills, and we didn't have all those fancy support units that we have these days. So Swift Darkness is less favored these days. It's not exactly a DPS stat, but it's not bad to farm, because every character in your roster, be that a support or a tank or a DPS, can use these items depending on the stats on them. So if you get a tanky melee item, then it can be going to your tank. If it's DPS stats, it can go to your melee. So Swift Darkness is not bad if you are very new. Now if you want to focus a little bit more on optimized stats, then there are sets like the Lava Gear, for instance, which gives crit damage. So if you want to stack more crit damage because for some reason you are low on it, then crit damage stats from Lava Gear are not bad. This is a bit hard to find, and it's very gimmicky. You can't really use crit damage on your supports except for Lavril, and you can't really use it on your tanks because they don't benefit from it. So farming this is a bit meh. That's why I don't even have any of these, because Beast of Chaos is just so much better. But if you really want crit damage for some reason, then this is the way to go. And then of course there is also the old Fire Gear, which I have like one piece here, which gives crit chance. So for some reason, if you need a lot more crit chance on your character, then you can farm for this. Now again, the problem with this is that your tanks do not benefit from it. A lot of characters these days have built-in crit chance, so they will not benefit so much. And again, supports and tanks generally don't need that much crit. Well, priests can do crit healing, which gives them a lot more healing. If that is something you need at the current content you are running, then it can be beneficial to them, but otherwise it's still not really great. And then finally, well, if you are already at it, Dark Legion gear, this one is perhaps the most used nowadays, because it gives crit damage to your allies, all of them. So you get 5% from 2 set and another 8%, so altogether 13% if you have a 4 set of Dark Legion gear on a character, and this adds up. So if you have 7 support characters for your 1 DPS, then you are already looking at like 90% crit damage just from items that your other characters are wearing. So Dark Legion, it can be used on your DPS too. I mean, you will get some extra crit damage to yourself, or if you are like a support DPS, then this also works. Generally speaking, I would if you are not going for Manticore, or if you do not have the good Manticore pieces, you might as well farm this. It will be good for your supports, it will be good for your tanks, and it will help your main DPS deal more damage. So of course, Transcendence Perks you also need to consider. You cannot really have a general guide to that. The tier 2 perks can often be guessed, but some characters just have so good tier 3 and tier 5 that you just skip tier 2 by design or by default, and you just go for them. But this is something that you need to read the skills for. It really depends on the character themselves, what works, and again, what content you are running, because in some cases you might not need the mana, for instance, from this one, while in other content this couldn't be really useful, just as an example. So this is it really, guys. I said this is like not a comprehensive guide, but more like the thought process behind how you should actually try and gear up your characters, and then your choices need to depend on the content you are running, on the supports you are bringing, and the gimmicks of your own character, of course. So I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them below in the comments. Also to like and subscribe, it really helps the channel. And this has been it for now. Cloudie out. See you in the next one. Bye bye.